I want to ask you a question. Do you know anybody who has outlived their homeland? Outgrown it, maybe. But really, truly, how many people do you know who can no longer point at the place that they were born on a map? I wonder if you know anyone in that position. Well, Anina is. Her name, Anina, means glimmer, of light, of hope. But to be totally frank, Anina's glimmer of light isn't Fanning Island. Born in 2015, Anina is highly likely to see her homeland succumb to the sea. Life expectancy in Kiribati, the country of which Fanning Island is a part, is 67 years. At best estimates, Fanning Island is expected to disappear underwater within the next 50. Everyone currently living on Fanning Island will be made homeless in the next half a century. Some of them know, but many of them don't. Of course, there are plans underway for relocating, but this isn't a choice. This is Mother Nature saying, time's up. Time to move on. And it's the harsh reality of rising sea levels for one of the world's most remote islands. A beautiful atoll, arching like a green and rust ring around a spectacular azul lagoon. At its highest point, Fanning Island rises just 3 meters or 9 feet above the sea. We sail with swells that reach far higher than the tip-top of this paradisical Pacific pearl. The vast majority of the island's landmass is already underwater, and whether or not Anina yet knows, one day over the next 5 decades, she'll be evacuated from her homeland, never to return. But this talk isn't about impending doom and gloom. It's about the preciousness of the here and now, the wonder of living in the moment, and the privilege of visiting a vanishing smudge of heaven on earth. Okay, so let's zoom way out and situate ourselves before we zoom back in to talk more about Fanning Island in particular. Fanning Island is part of a nation called Kiribati, a vastly spread scattering of islands at the very heart of the Pacific Ocean. From a bird's eye view, islands that look no more than flakes of fish food floating on the surface of a fish tank. The Pacific Ocean is huge. It's the largest ocean on Earth, accounting for half of the world's entire oceanic water. And these islands are tiny. And yet, Kiribati, strangely, lays claim to being one of the largest nations on Earth. With only 100,000 residents collectively, the islands of Kiribati are spread over 1.35 million square miles of ocean. Christmas Island is a full 2,000 miles from the administrative capital Tarawa. To put that into perspective, that's the same distance as driving from New York to Phoenix, Arizona. Actually, there are only 9 countries on Earth that are officially larger than 1 million square miles. Russia, Canada, the United States, China, Brazil, Australia, India, Argentina, and Kazakhstan. Kiribati doesn't get a mention, because despite its vastness, most of the land between point A and point B in Kiribati is the seabed of the Pacific Ocean. But despite not making it into any official lists for its hugeness, Kiribati indisputably holds the distinction of being the only country on Earth to straddle both the equator and the international dateline. Kiribati is the only country on the planet in all 4 hemispheres. It is the only place on Earth that is truly north, south, east, and west. In Kiribati, it is always today, yesterday, and tomorrow, every day. A summer Sunday in the capital is a winter Saturday on Christmas Island. So it's a funny contradiction. One of the smallest nations on Earth, by landmass, by population, is also one of the very largest by geographic spread. Let's take a crash course in the history of the 33-island sovereign state of Kiribati before spending a little bit more time focusing on Fanning Island. And let's start with the name. Kiribati. Kiribati, or Kiribati as the locals pronounce it, is the Gilbertese language way of referring to the Gilbert Islands. Anytime you see the letters T-I in Kiribati, it's pronounced as an S. For much of the island's mid to recent history, they've been collectively referred to as the Gilbert Islands, and it wasn't until independence from the British in 1979 that the name Kiribati was internationally accepted as the name for the country. We're going to come back to that moment of independence shortly. But first, people have lived in the Gilbert Islands, the 33 islands of Kiribati, for somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 years. Original settlers came from Southeast Asia and Micronesia. By the way, there are 3 regions of the Pacific Ocean when referring to island groups: Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. Now here's how they break down. Micronesia covers the northwest of the Pacific Ocean, stretching roughly the length of the Philippines. In modern terms, it includes the Federated States of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, and some US territories, including Guam. Melanesia is found further south, stretching from its northern point in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, south as far as Norfolk Island, and east to Fiji. And the largest unit, by far, in this categorization of Pacific Islands is Polynesia, which incorporates New Zealand, Tonga, Samoa, the Cook Islands, French Polynesia, Easter Island, right up north to Hawaii. Nowadays, the US is all over the Pacific, controlling islands in all 3 regions. France also maintains significant overseas territories here, as do Australia, New Zealand, Chile, and the UK, which brings us back to Kiribati. The Gilbert Islands became a British protectorate in 1892 at the height of the British Empire. The Gilbert Islands, Banaba, and the Ellice Islands, modern-day Tuvalu, were collectively administrated as the Gilbert and Ellice Islands Colony from 1916, and generally speaking, the islands were governed locally, but with financial and mineral benefits enriching the British treasury. World War II really changed the face of the Pacific, and the Gilbert Islands were, for a period, occupied by Japan, before the Japanese were militarily removed from the islands by Allied forces. Following the war, quality of life on the islands was enhanced by a series of aid-funded development packages, and the appetite for independence from the UK began to grow. Actually, Kiribati's independence from the UK came out of a legal battle for a greater share of royalties from phosphate mining, and financial compensation for irreparable environmental damage caused to the islands by industry fueled by Western interests. And while the court case concluded inconclusively, Britain offered a one-time payment of 10 million Australian dollars in return for removal of any further legal liability. As an independent nation, Kiribati joined the British Commonwealth, but elects a president, unlike other members of the Commonwealth like Australia, Canada and New Zealand, for whom King Charles is head of state. And, as a clear indication that geopolitics in this region is never static, the government of Kiribati is actively seeking and securing options to prepare the country for a future of rising sea levels and disappearing islands. Strategies currently being explored are the creation of artificial islets similar to offshore oil drilling platforms. And in 2014, the government bought 8 square miles of land on the Fijian island of Vanua Levu that could one day serve as a new Kiribati community, and for now provides additional agricultural land to support the country's food needs. So that's an overview of the country as a whole, 33 islands in the very heart of the Pacific Ocean. But let's now zoom back in on Fanning Island, or what's nowadays called the Tabuaeran Atoll, which is a rather wonderful story of its own. Tabuaeran translates as heavenly footprint, and I think they named it well. This island, a coral formation in the Northern Line Islands, some 5,422 kilometers from San Diego, was first discovered in 1798 by American trader and explorer Edmund Fanning, who for centuries lent this island his name. Edmund Fanning lived something of a storied life, quite literally, given that he himself wrote books about his travels, and he earned himself the nickname the Pathfinder of the Pacific. Legend has it by the way, legend of his own pen, that just before discovering Fanning Island, Edmund Fanning had a premonition, which led to him discovering the Palmyra Atoll in his sleep from the captain's cabin aboard his ship Betsy. In his sleep. I told you this guy was good. He first went to sea as a cabin boy at the age of 14, and 10 years later, he was already in the captain's quarters, and not as a cabin boy. His memoirs, Voyages Round the World, were published in 1833, but it's his subsequent book, the succinctly titled Voyages to the South Seas, Indian and Pacific Oceans, China, Northwest Coast, Fiji Islands, South Shetlands, etc., published 5 years later, that he discusses his discovery of a few small islands in the South Pacific, including his namesake, Fanning Island, at 3 degrees 51 minutes north, 159 degrees 12 minutes west. Anyway, in 1888, the British arrived and annexed the islet as the site for a trans-Pacific cable relay station, which remained in service for about 80 years until a new cable was laid in 1963. Commercial interest led to the island being bought by a copra processing company, an industry that continues on the island to this day, along with seaweed production. Copra is the dried white flesh of a coconut. Coconuts are cut open and sun-dried before being exported. The copra can then be pressed for coconut oil as well as for animal feed. This 13-square-mile island of coconut trees and seaweed still lives a very traditional, off-the-grid sort of life. This is not your typical international cruise ship port. And how cruise ships ended up coming here is pretty interesting. And that story starts in Hawaii. It starts in Hawaii because people love to cruise to Hawaii. Well, people have cruised to Hawaii for a very long time. The Matson Navigation Company became the first commercial steamship to offer mainlanders the opportunity to visit Hawaii back in 1882. On another ocean, Holland America Line was soon to celebrate its 10th anniversary. Matson ran steamships from San Francisco and Los Angeles through the turn of the century, until the early 1970s. Now, the 1970s and 80s saw a slightly more sporadic service from a company called American Hawaiian Cruises, which was a main way to get to the islands until 9/11. Now, 9/11 saw huge changes to the travel industry and many travel companies went under, including American Hawaiian Cruises. So another cruise line sailed in to fill the void, NCL, an international cruise line. And suddenly, trips to Hawaii became a little bit more complicated, thanks to the Passenger Vessel Services Act of 1886, the Jones Act. To protect American shipping companies, the Jones Act restricts foreign-flagged vessels from completing domestic voyages in the States, and a Hawaii cruise from California is exactly that, America to America, domestic travel. An island-hopping cruise without the 6-day Pacific crossing was downright impossible for non-American vessels. So NCL, the only cruise line offering regular Hawaiian cruises in the aftermath of 9/11, looked around for a solution to this challenge. A challenge that hadn't affected Matson or American Hawaiian Cruises because they had both operated American-flagged ships. NCL looked high and low, literally. They scoured the map for the nearest foreign land to Hawaii, and they found it. 1,100 miles due south of Hawaii, Fanning Island. And so Fanning Island, hitherto unheard of by most, became a regular cruise stop for Hawaiian island hoppers, exchanging 6 days at sea for 2. NCL built many of the facilities on the island. They built the jetty where tenders dock. They built the primary school, which is called NCL Primary. In addition to the quarterly supply ships, also from Hawaii, NCL ships became the atoll's most regular visitors. And the locals became somewhat accustomed to the typical blend of awe, befuddlement, pity, and admiration of Western tourists fresh from the beach metropolis of Honolulu. School children and elders would greet the ships with song and dance. Locals would set up tables with handmade crafts and fresh coconuts straight from the tree. Tribal warriors would pose for photographs. It was all going rather well, actually. Tourists started spreading the word about this little island in the middle of the Pacific, and cruisers would pack clothes, shoes, and little gifts for the children. Guests would tip the dancing groups and singing welcome parties. A dollar here, a dollar there. Everyone was having a lovely time. Not that the locals had very much use for the dollar bills that American tourists were squeezing into the sticky palms of sweetly singing 6-year-olds. There's only one shop on the whole atoll, and they use Australian dollars. Actually, funny story. The elders of the community collected up the tips that had been generously shared by visiting cruisers and approached a ship's purser one time that they visited, and the elders asked the purser if he'd be able to change the American dollars into Australian dollars, which is the currency used across the islands of Kiribati, and then they'd be able to send it to the capital on a future supply ship and contribute to a future project for the community. The ship's purser said, of course. Yes, he'd be happy to help. Asked the elder to give him the dollars that he wanted changed, and the elder handed over the stash of $75,000. NCL's visits to the island dried up after that. Not because of that, but because the company decided to launch an American-flagged ship. Wouldn't be hampered by the Jones Act. It could do year-round island-hopping trips around Hawaii without the need for a 5-day detour. The visits stopped. So did the steady trickle of American dollars into little children's hands. So did the donations of t-shirts, sandals, first aid kits. And so, considering the more extensive, discovery-inspired voyages of Holland America Line, Holland America Line now visits Fanning Island a few times each year. Maybe 4 times, never more than 6. And the locals are delighted to see us. The town gathers at the tender pier, the children are given a day off school, the dancers dance, the singers sing, the singers who can't sing too, and a doorway's opened, albeit just for a momentary glance, into a totally different way of life. So what can we expect? Well, we're at anchor a short boat ride away from the tender pier, just off the shore closest to a settlement called Napari. The tender pier leads to a concrete market square where locals set up a market, greet us with tribal song and dance, and offer very homemade tours of their island. Here are my top 10 things to see and do in Fanning Island. First, just enjoy the spirited welcome. Step ashore and soak up the warmth and authenticity of the locals' invitation to explore their home. Enjoy the music and the dancing, pose for photos with the tribal warriors who are much less terrifying than you might expect. It's a heartfelt welcome to a very remote land. Then, if you want to stay local, and to be honest, when the entire island is only 13 square miles, everything could be considered local, enjoy browsing the pop-up craft market that locals prepare for our visit. The open-air straw market is great for a very unique souvenir, and popular pieces include shell jewellery, ornaments, knives hand-carved from shark teeth, and handmade dream catchers. If you feel like venturing further afield, then islanders offer tours of their home. They'll take you to visit a cluster of homes, you can check out the seaweed farms, you can see the island's supply stores, all while learning a little bit about life here and local history. Prepare for a slightly bumpy ride on the back of a pickup truck, though. If food is your thing, then there is sometimes a local barbecue to join with entertainment from a local dance group. Or maybe it's the water that's calling you here, and I wouldn't be surprised. It's beautiful. So my 5th tip for Fanning Island is to head out to the beach. In a similar vein, snorkeling trips around the outer reef offer an amazing chance to see colourful corals, giant parrotfish, butterfly fish, shy sea turtles, giant manta rays, and reef sharks. In the central lagoon, there's a beach shipwreck which is visible both above and below the waterline. Now, I mentioned an open-back pickup truck before, so you'd be right to assume that there's a road of sorts here. It's a dirt road, but it is perfectly possible to hike it, and there really isn't much traffic to be concerned about here. And there are usually a small collection of bicycles available to rent near the dock, so if they're there, then you could even head out for a cycle on the atoll. Okay, at this point, I am starting to struggle with 10. This is a very remote, teeny tiny island after all. So I'm going to call it quits at 8, and I'm going to challenge you to come back to me with good ideas for 9 and 10. So at number 8, if you want a game of basketball, NCL built a concrete basketball court on the island. It's a rare treat to be able to visit such an out-of-the-way and almost unknown destination. Even the locals can't enjoy it forever, giving Fanning Island's impending sacrifice to the turquoise twinkle of this vast and ever-changing ocean. So relish your moment in this beautiful Atlantis of the future. And may the sun set slowly on Anina's home.